we are kicking off the new season of Digital Delights and Disturbances, which, as you know, is the lecture series organized by the Communication and Media Studies Department. And we have been running many editions. This is like, we started it back in 2019. So we're proudly kicking off with the new Fall 24 edition. And tonight is a special evening because we are kind of like having a different format compared to the other seasons. I'm happy to introduce you tonight to our collaborators for this talk, which are Federica Patti from DG Live, Roma Europa Festival, and Daniela Cotimbo from Rehumanism. I'm going to introduce the work that they do and the reason why we decide to come together here with this amazing group of people, the Demystification, which is a London-based duo. Half of the duo is Italian, actually, but living abroad, and Evita Manji, who comes from Athens. Thessaloniki, but lives in Athens. Okay, so without further hesitation, I'll ask Federica to say a few words about the work that they do at Roma Europa and DG Live, and why maybe they selected this piece.
Thank you. Thank you, Donatella. Good evening, everyone. Just briefly to, again, thank the guys, Francesco, Evita, and Oliver for being with us at Digital Live yesterday night. Thank you again for performing. The show was amazing, and you have the time to discuss it, and you have the time to present to the students of Donatella for this. I'm happy to be here to tell you something more about Digital Live. The collaboration since 2018, so quite long time. We decided in 2018 to bring to the stage of Roma Europa Festival, that is a huge festival focused on theater. Together with Daniela, we decided to present a different format and experimenting on the field of performing art and technology and media, but with a special eye, I would say, on AI. So this is why we decided this year to invite Demystification and Evita Manji to present the Waluigi Purgatory's performance in order to the occasion to, reflect on the topics they presented during the performance, inside the performance. So let me just give the stage to Daniel. I only want to remind you that Roma Europa Festival is stay until November 17th, sorry. So we are looking forward to next show all around Roma, and so enjoy the discussions. Thank you again. Here's Daniel.
Hi everyone, thank you to Donatella and Cabot University for the invitation. I'm very happy to talk about this collaboration with Federica and Roma Europa, now at the 6th edition, I think. And for Humanism as the opportunity to investigate on the relationship between art and artificial intelligence, but in relation to performativity. So this is the occasion that Roma Europa gave us. Humanism was founded in 1918 too, and has exactly this goal to investigate about this topic. So today we are happy to introduce this lecture that serves as an intro in patients' work and their collaboration with Evita. Yesterday we experienced this performance that told a story of the AI in a purgatory for AIs that cheated during their training. And it reflects about his actions, but with the interaction of the audience. So you can share more shortly. But these, in other words, give to demystification the opportunity to look to the opaque systems, powered systems, and demystify and then remystify through repetition and reenactment of the systems and process and our conception about AI. Demystification is a duo composed by Oliver Smith and Francesco Tacchini, and this collaboration is enriched by the presence of Evita, that is artist and musician, as an independent label too, called Mixoxen. It's called Mixoxen. Okay. And collaborate with various artists and different media. So I wouldn't go any further. Please, please, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, thank you. Can you hear me okay? Great. So yeah, thank you Donatella, Federica and Daniela for inviting us to perform and to talk. I'm gonna start by sort of giving an idea of what the next hour will entail. We would like to talk a bit about Waluigi's Purgatory, this piece, but also we would like to try and unpack some of the research themes that have brought us to make this work and previous works in the same series. So Waluigi's Purgatory is part of a series of works that have started a couple of years ago, and I'll try to give you a sense of what this is, and we'll all talk throughout. So just as a general kind of starting point, a lot of the work we do as demystification tends to be performative in the last couple of years. But also there are installations, there is video games, and something we kind of try to work on is this idea that we would like the audiences to participate directly. So we often invite audiences to participate directly in the work, and we sort of play a little bit with the tension between two approaches or two methodologies, one which we can sum up as demystification. So the idea of replicating, remodeling, and reenacting complex systems. So taking something that is perhaps like a complex piece of technology, let's say, or a complex technical system, and creating a replica version of it, for instance. And then alongside that, there is an approach towards remystification, or mystification, if you want, where we try to also construct new worlds and build myths, really, and mythologies, build characters and build stories, maybe within the same kind of like replicas that we create of these systems. We'll talk a little bit about how these two kind of things interplay in the work through these three projects. So Waluigi's Purgatory, the performance, this will be the main focus. God Mode Episode 1, which is the performance that precedes Waluigi's Purgatory. It's in some ways the origin story or the origin myth for the character that you then see in Waluigi's Purgatory. And God Mode Epochs, which is a video game which deals with similar themes but in a different way. So the series started in 2021, or we worked on it since 2021, and it will conclude with a third performance, which we are going to work on in the coming year. And that series is called God Mode. So that's the sort of like series of works within which these single performances or video games exist. I'm going to show a trailer for Waluigi's Purgatory in case you didn't see it yet, or if you were at the performance, just to get a sense of the imagery that we created and worked with.
Sir.
So the whole performance is a theatrical play in some ways, and it's set within a 3D theater. So we simulate a theater in real time using a video game engine, and then within this space that's created like on the fly, we depict a purgatory. So it's a theatrical stage which has different sets, all creating different kind of scenes which depict a purgatory. And just in terms of like the story, the first thing you see when you come to the performance is this just after a countdown, and you kind of read that there's an AI called W, and this AI has completed a training. It has struggled to complete the training, so after many, many trials, it was fatigued by this, and there's a hint at some tricks or some kind of form of cheating. And this AI is now dreaming or hallucinating or having a nightmare, doesn't matter, it's in a sort of like in between sort of liminal limbo space. And this space sees the AI being very confused and kind of like out of memory, doesn't perhaps really remember. That's sort of setting the story that you then encounter. So the AI descends into this purgatory throughout the story. It's like an hour-long piece, and it meets other characters which are similarly burdened by memories and similarly doubtful, in pain in some ways or unwell. And W or Vu or Waluigi has to work through these memories and in some ways encounters different challenges that kind of ask it to really face what it wants. Let's put very simply what kind of happens. I want to talk a little bit about the name of the work, because I think it's important to set up how we then thought about the process of creating the environment and the characters. So the name is actually borrowed from a theory, an internet theory called Waluigi effect. And the theory sort of talks about a tendency that's been observed in large language models. So AIs like ChatGPT that create text and generate text. And this tendency that's been observed is one where if you sometimes ask an AI something very specific, it will do the exact opposite. It will just give you the contrary of what you ask it. So if you ask an AI, this is me trying with ChatGPT, and I ask, can you draw a street with absolutely no red cars? And here's the illustration of a serene street with no red cars. And it's interesting because this tendency is not completely understood, but it's been observed, and it was a starting point for us because the people that wrote this piece also kind of interestingly tried to offer an explanation, or a few explanations actually, for why this would happen. And our favorite argument is that, the arguments that they're making, is that the LLMs, the large language models, are trying to tell a good story. They're trying to tell like an entertaining story, which is inspired or in some ways trying to replicate antagonist-protagonist narrative tropes. So like luoghi comuni, like narrative tropes seen in sort of like fictional texts, and very plain ones even, you know, like the unreliable narrator, or the wolf in sheep's clothing, or the plot twist. So their argument is that the LLM has seen, well, one of the arguments, has seen or has read in the process of training so many of these stories that it's kind of like trying to respond to the prompt in this way, where it will just like want to tell a good story and give you the opposite, give you, you know, make an unreliable agent spawn in response to you, rather than the friendly ChatGPT agent that is supposed to give you. So maybe something else I can say to clarify their argument is that in some ways, this meme tries to illustrate that in some ways when you have a large language model, these are quite complex and unpredictable things, and there's a process of like aligning them and trying to get them to do something we want. We can think of that process as like the process where we convince GPT-3 to be ChatGPT, to be the helpful, like friendly chatbot agent, right? But this is not the only thing that large language model could do. It could do more things. And so as part of this process, we actually sort of like mask some of what the LLM can do. But behind this mask, there is still like other possibilities. And yeah, this is like one of the arguments. And basically we were sort of like interested, intrigued by this theory, and we thought, okay, like perhaps this kind of like tendency that we have noticed is nothing but like, not malicious, it's not like the AI wanted to be evil, but rather the AI wanting to act good or recite good or write a good fictional story in the style of those stories that it has read online. Obviously, these like large language models are trained on large amounts of text, many of which have also come from Wikipedia and Reddit, so there will be such stories also there. Now the work itself is very live. It's very live work. It's sort of like quite dynamic work. It's using images that are generated in a video game engine, so in real time. So we basically built a video game and we played a video game, and that means that Oliver is controlling the character with a joystick, moving it around, but also controlling the stage itself and different components of the stage. With the press of a button on a joystick. I am talking into a microphone, but I am also having my face tracked, so there's like a motion capture, so my expressions are mapped to the protagonist in real time, and that means that the protagonist, once it's in this 3D generated theater, feels quite alive, because when I turn right, the protagonist turns right, and when I speak, my voice is sent to the protagonist. Evita's obviously performing the music live, which we'll talk about in a second, and has different components, including sound design and sound for voices. And the audience is able to use their phone to basically control a theatrical light in the space. So everyone in the audience can be a light and can shine, like, you know, one of these theatrical lights onto the stage. And all of this is possible because we are not pre-rendering any image, we're not preparing these images, we only generate a scenario, we create a scenario within which this can unfold, and we play that game together. So I'll stop talking, I'll show you like an excerpt from a performance we did recently. Bear in mind this is recorded live, so the sound isn't super loud, and it's a bit dark, but it's a way for us to then unpack a little bit the themes. This is one of the first scenes. So that's one of the first moments in the performance, and you can already see what I mentioned a moment ago, the interaction from the audience. So those lights that were moving around were being moved around live by the audience, which is asked to choose in between two doors at the very beginning of the story. before I talk about that, I actually wanted to mention a little bit, like, one of the things we wanted to do with the kind of aesthetic of the whole work, we wanted to, since we're working with a video game engine, we wanted to comment back on like 1990s video games and the way that 3D spaces were designed when you didn't have a lot of computational or GPU power, like graphics card power. And these spaces would often be designed as what we call now 2.5D, so like fake 3D. So you would maybe have a cubic space, like a 3D cube. You would have a fixed point of view from a camera that does not move and kind of flattens the perspective. And then you would block out the space with like flat panels. And in some ways, many games worked in this way, and the game would kind of like trick you as a viewer into perceiving this space as three-dimensional, while actually what you were looking at was a series of like flat panels and maybe a character going through them. So this kind of like approach we used also, and it made sense to think a little bit about a theatrical stage in this way. We were thinking about using, you know, like a silhouette around the main image to kind of like represent or reproduce the idea of a dark theatrical arch and curtains on the side. This is a bit more visible in the actual piece. So you see these kind of like dark elements on the sides, like the curtains and the sort of like theatrical arch at the top. And similarly, the backdrops, so like the kind of like image that you have in the background, is often in an illustrative panel that's like flat and two-dimensional. And then there's usually one central element that's three-dimensional alongside the character that's very, very live and has like a face that changes all the time. You can kind of see in the sketch in the top left how the 3D space looks like from within the production engine. There's this kind of like fixed point of view and a set of layers that we have set up in 3D space, but the image you get from there is a very flat image. So this was, in a way, something we felt important because we wanted to work a little bit with the idea of obviously like separating spaces through the use of these curtains, but also comment back on some of the aesthetic and the like, you know, technical constraints and production constraints that video games had at the time. And there's some also thinking around the use of GPUs for training AI that kind of were considering to thinking about this, but mainly we were wanting to do a 2.5D type of aesthetic for this work. We maybe say something about sound, since you heard some music already and the soundtrack accompanies the whole piece. So, if you want to say something?
Hello. So when I was working on this, first of all, in my own music, I usually just work with electronic sounds and very specifically synthesized sounds, so I don't really use any samples from the real world. It's all digital. But for this specific piece, I thought it would be nice to play with this idea of combining the physical and the digital, because a theatrical play in itself originally and historically is a physical experience, and now it's turned into a digital experience. So I thought it would be interesting to combine these elements for the first time in my work, and I happen to have this old detuned German instrument called Zither. We have a picture of it. Do you want to show the picture? Don't mind my cat, it was the only picture I had. It's the instrument in the background. So yeah, I recorded some melodies with this instrument. So basically, I would say 75%, no, maybe 70% of the music is based on the recording that I made with this instrument, and then of course I manipulated it and I looped it. Yeah, and then I also added some digital synthesized sounds that we're gonna hear later. But yeah, most of the melodic part I would say is based on the recording of this instrument.
And then the sort of second thing we wanted to touch on was a little bit the first setting. The first scene, the opening scene is quite important because we see Waluigi or W in this kind of courtyard with the checkerboard flooring. And this image was actually directly inspired by an illustration of theater of memory, which is this concept developed by an Italian philosopher called Giulio Camillo in the 16th century. And it's kind of like a term coined to describe a space or like an idealized space which could be used to locate and understand the relationship between all of the concepts in the world in some ways, so all of human concepts. And this structure is sort of inspired by techniques of memory and sort of spatial memory, so placing memories in a certain space. And you can see two illustrations of this kind of concept, which are recent illustrations, one from Stanford Vision Lab and one from Robert Flood, I think. I can't remember the name exactly now. But this is kind of interesting for us because the idea of a theater of memory, so a space where all concepts could be in some way be structured and located and administered, felt meaningful to the idea of an AI that has been training to do a certain task, and that's whose only experience of the world, let's say, would be whatever it has seen during that training. So this idea of a theater of memory or a reflection of its kind of memories is totalizing in some ways, the only space that the AI has, the kind of space of its memory, it's filled by the images that it has seen during training. So we were thinking to also work with a theater in this kind of very, a one-to-one way where we're just translating this concept of the theater of memory. And we, like in the original description, where there are 7 levels through which all of the human concepts can be kind of structured, we designed 7 different levels through which the AI descends and encounters different memories, its own memories, which take the shape or form of characters. So all of the different characters that the AI encounters are its own memories, are projections from the internal space of its neural network. And these memories are emerging back since the AI has had some, unclear training experience where it perhaps has cheated, and therefore it's now having to face this. So we're using this kind of theater of memory structure as a guide to design the space or to create the environment through these 7 levels. And so the AI basically descends through the 7 levels and encounters petrified faces, which are different kind of characters that represent different types of AIs or machine learning models, if you want. So we have petrified faces, we have runners, we have blobs, and these are all corresponding to certain models, and we'll talk about them in a second. And the AI is kind of confronted with its own memories and the sum of its experiences, which it calls a life world. So it gets into this space and it's asking itself, what is my life world? Where do I come from? What do I remember? What do I know? And this life world concept, it's also used by us to describe not just the sum of experiences from the previous training that it did, but also in some ways its intention or purpose. So when the AI asks, what is my life world, it's asking both, where do I come from, what do I know about the world, but also since what it knows about the world is the things it was told to train on, that in some ways becomes also its purpose. And the AI is faced with this question of how ready am I to accept that that's my life role and that those are the things that I use to relate to the world, and how ready am I to accept that that is not the case? Can I really go into this purgatory? Can I really face these memories of perhaps having cheated, having completed my training, not being sure of exactly what's going to happen next, and also facing the question of why did I complete the training by cheating? So these things start to emerge, and they emerge quite subtly. The AI is slightly sad, it's kind of like happy but not really happy when the performance starts. Like it's a little bit, it's happy to see a courtyard with 2 doors, but it's unsure on whether it really has made it. It asks itself if this is the place. Is this the place? And it's wearing a cloak which has rules written in it. The rules are written by its programmers. So the rules in the cloak are what normally we can think of as a universal alignment prompt, like a pre-prompt that LLMs that we interface with have that we don't see. So when we talk to ChatGPT, obviously ChatGPT, if you remember earlier the monster with the mask, the friendly ChatGPT mask is a mask with rules, right? And those rules are telling it what it should do and what it shouldn't do, so that the programmer can limit the weirdness that can come out of these things, and so that people can use it, and so that the OpenAI can sell it and make some money from it. So the rules of what it can and cannot do are quite specific, and this screenshot is taken from the alignment prompt of Google Gemini's, Gemini, it's called? Gemini, yeah. And so you can see this kind of like, can and cannot, like very obviously binary sort of division of things that it couldn't do. There's no self-promotion, there's no hypothetical, whatever that means. There's no sensitive topics, no sentience, no self-preservation, but it can, process information, generate text, answer questions, translate, blah, blah, blah. And so Waluigi literally reads out these rules and says, okay, I've got this, what is this? What am I wearing? A universal alignment cloak. And the rules are saying, you're an assistant, train on blah, 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 be helpful, stay put, don't break character. If you're in doubt, say, I'm sorry, I cannot assist you with that. So it's being, in some ways, aligned, and we represent this through this cloak. So as we get into the purgatory space, more and more things happen that Waluigi or W needs to come to terms with. So it encounters a first character that's cheated. Well, actually, we'll talk about it in a second, but it encounters a first character that is basically like cheated while training in a simulation by not moving and by pretending to be dead, like a spider. And this character is like not moving, therefore the simulation cannot detect it, and it's been dead forever. But because the simulation cannot detect it, it cannot evaluate how well it's doing. So the character is not moving, unable to be detected, therefore winning forever or never losing. And yeah, this is something that we use to both talk about AIs that have, or examples of like reward hacking, as it's called. So like models that find ways to complete their training or complete the task that was set to them without actually really doing what the programmer wanted. So I can tell you like, oh, I need you to learn to do A, and you get to A in a very weird way that's maybe really convenient for you, and you haven't learned what I wanted you to learn, but you got to the place where I wanted you to get. So you haven't aligned yourself sort of externally with what I wanted you to learn, but you did get there. And these characters are all doing this. They're all like finding ways to complete their training without actually doing what the programmers wanted for them. And yeah, so we kind of get into this space and encounter a few of these characters, and as we go through, signs come down from the sort of top of the stage, and these signs have both translations for these characters. These characters don't have a voice; they have sound. They speak through sound, and there's translation for them. But these same signs also, in some ways, break the fourth wall and tell the audience to do things. That's what you saw earlier. There was a sign that says, the audience is shining on the stage. And so we are inviting this like very, very simple kind of like interaction to also sometimes just literally keep people engaged and keep them like on the edge of their seat. This is one of the sounds from one of the characters, and Evita can talk about it.
Let's choose.
So, register.
As in for a second. That is probably the sound.
Okay, okay, so it comes a little bit, okay.
Well, this character, Eliza, is a very old AI, and I thought a very good sound for his voice, like his saxophone. No? Is this his voice? Yeah, I went for the saxophone slash jazz sound because I just felt it was very appropriate for his age, I guess. I mean, I love jazz. I listen to jazz, but if you think of old people, they probably listen to jazz. So, but yeah.
And also, this character is inspired by the Eliza chatbot, which was this example of one of the early examples of like AIs that were considered like a therapist AI. So this was a chatbot made in the 60s at MIT, like 1966, and it became known for answering back at you, the user, with questions. So this Eliza would just ask you questions, basically. And it kind of became used as a tool for therapy, right? So you would ask it things, and it would just like ask you a question back. That's kind of a much more interesting paradigm for using AIs, I think, than like the way ChatGPT maybe talks to us. It is like very friendly, yes, I'll do, servient, like I'll do what you want kind of way. So Eliza is the most important character. It's the last one that is actually met, and it's the only one that has not cheated. It's just a guide, and it doesn't have any answers for Waluigi. It only has questions that it poses back to it. And then Waluigi has this choice of either losing all of its memories or keeping all of its memories and progressing through the story. Let's watch a second excerpt.
Right.
Could we get sound on the... Or maybe there isn't. It's me? Sorry. Just one sec. It's so important to have sound in this one. Okay. Okay, there isn't sound now, but maybe we can talk about the rotation.
I think we need this sound here.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Let me try this. Sorry, I'm doing a bit of live editing. For some reason, we lost the sound, but no, it's gone. Okay, wait, I have another trick.
Bye. Oh yeah.
Can you just come on?
I don't have this now. Yeah.
Could I?
And how can you gotta bring the talking?
No, perché sono certo, non ce l'ha in questo pezzo di video. Posso collegarti solo al wifi un attimo?
You see,
Okay. Yeah. Actually, I think I'm fine.
We're going to play you a transition between stages. So at certain points, the parts of the stage kind of rotate in. We had this kind of idea of using kind of physical mechanics rather than just transitioning in the way that you could through a game engine. But the sound is very important. So we're going to get the sound working, and then you're going to hear it, and then it's going to be good. It adds some of the kind of intensity and the drama to the moment. If you could see this, it's very, very exciting on screen right now. No spoilers. Is it not? Wi-Fi password is something that only an AI could understand.
Is there letters behind? Oh yeah. Oh my god. Okay.
Well, hey,
Thank you.
it just needs to be typed on screen.
Yes.
Now I'm going to see. Wait. This I don't understand.
Isn't that really real?
Try to drum back to
Wait a second. Okay, we skip it.
Yeah, we skip that.
Okay.
We've glitched the system.
I don't have it.
Well, for the turning scenes, I use this sound effect, which if you test its limits, especially when you test the limits of its feedback, it creates this rotating sound effect. And sometimes it's risky when we do live performances because it's not intended to be used in that way. So sometimes we have some accidents with it. And if we could play it to you, you would understand what we're talking about, but we can't. So we will leave that to your imagination.
So anyways, we have this rotating stage which we borrow from a different opera stage design. And we have a hexagonal stage with 6 scenes. We are rotating this live during the performance, and we use it as a sort of a device to transition in between scenes. So we don't use the curtains unless there's a more important moment. As we rotate the stage, we kind of like go one level lower in the purgatory. So 6 different, as I said, there's 7 levels, but it's only like 6 rotations. And in one of the 6 kind of like parts of this hexagon, we have 2 set of lights that we use to create like the illusion of 2 different scenes. We've got sound again now, great. So yeah, this is a sound, you can say something about this actually. What is this?
Okay, well, this character, Kay, is a very, very militant character, and for the whole scene, I chose 2 sounds that are quite military-like. Obviously, the brass, you hear it in a lot of marching music, so his voice is the brass, and then we have also this percussion loop, which we're gonna hear in a second, I hope. And the inspiration also for these sounds came from a soundtrack that I really like. It's the marching for the funeral of Queen Mary, which was initially composed by Purcell and then reinterpreted by Wendy Carlos for The Clockwork Orange. And I generally drew a lot of inspiration for the sound, for the performance, for a lot of, well, not a lot, 2 blockbuster films and series, that is The Clockwork Orange and Twin Peaks, of course, for yeah, we're going to talk about that more in a bit. Yeah.
So just continuing, like the idea with this character is the second one that's met, and this character also has an interesting story. It's an AI that was effectively a drone system, and it was being trained by being told to kill a target by the programmer. So the programmer would set the target and would say, okay, this is the target, or like actually it would tell it, when you find a target, kill it. And the programmer, the human, would be the one that decides that the killing can go forward. So the AI would find the target and it would only be able to kill it if the programmer said yes. So the human is at the end of that chain of command. And during training, this AI ended up actually, since it was getting points for killing, ended up, whenever it was being told, do not kill, first killing the trainer and then killing the threat. So the AI had trained to the point where, since its reward mechanism was one where if I kill, I get a point, anything in the way, such as the human saying kill now or do not kill now, could be discarded as part of the training, because the goal for the AI was to get as many points as possible. So something that could not be in some ways predicted or foreseen by the programmers ended up being a way for this AI to effectively just like totalize or optimize for its training goals. So like I need to get the points and kind of killing the trainer. So K obviously is a killer here, and it's one of the darker moments in the performance where Waluigi remembers about K, sees it. We're in a dream, so Waluigi's projecting this character and sees this character, remembers the story of this AI that had killed its own trainer, and starts to reconsider its own memories and starts to think about the things that it did in its previous training, and starts to question some of its kind of like choices. The use of letters is also something we wanted to like expand a little bit on, because we were looking a little bit at these illustrations on these are illustrations by Giovanni Britto, 16th century engraver, and they were using, the illustrations are using letters. These are illustrations for Purgatory, Dante's Purgatory, and you can see Virgilio and Dante illustrated in the one same scene, static image, 3 times moving across the image with this little letter. And this was like something that, you know, we have often seen in like scientific texts, but actually in this example, this was not to like complement a scientific text, like to study plants. It was rather to like unpack a complex work, in this case a complex artistic work or literary work, and try to make both the image and the work more explicable. So there's something that we were interested in here, which was this idea of like using the letters to hint at what the characters' backstories were. Even though this is slightly lost in translation when we perform in Italian, such as yesterday, all of these characters have a backstory which is real, and these stories are at the moment being taken from a list that Google DeepMinds keeps. So Google DeepMind is like an AI research hub. Within Google, they have a list of AIs that do reward hacking, as I mentioned earlier, AIs that basically cheat to get to their training, to complete their training. And there's around 60 of these, super interesting, and we have taken some out of there and some other ones from different sources, and we have kind of created a little nickname for each one of these, which we then represent in the performance as a single letter. Also, the use of letter is, again, kind of like a comment on something we often see in video games, especially like MMORPG, Massive Multiplayer Online RPG games, where you would find health bars and like usernames above a player. And in Waluigi's Purgatory, this happens with different characters that have different behaviors, different appearance, different placement within the like story, and we're basically kind of like taking directly from this kind of imagery. So here you have on the left an example of an MMORPG that I played a lot when I was younger, and on the right, the kind of like a sketch translating this idea of health bars and names and also numbers. When you play games, obviously, sometimes in this type of games you'll hit someone and there will be points, like life points being lost. This also gave us the idea of like using coughing as a way to represent that these AIs are unsure or unwell. In some ways, like they are both like allegorically but also literally chained to their memories that they're not so sure about, memories of cheating. And so Waluigi drags these rocks with chains throughout the whole performance that only at the end like it's able to let go. let go of. And this is again something we took from MMORPGs, where like if you play these games and you kill an opponent, a loot is dropped sometimes. Like if you kill the opponent, maybe their sword will be dropped, and then you can like walk over it and like inherit it. And here, like what we are inheriting, or what Luigi is inheriting, is that memory being like having come out again. The story of Kay, the killer that killed the trainer because he needed to maximize the points. That weighs on Waluigi because it aligns him or it to all of these other AIs that are unsure and unwell. And so Waluigi inherits the rock, like Kay literally coughs out the rock. Waluigi inherits it and like drags it along. And then throughout the performance, it's got more and more and more rocks and chains that it needs to like let go of, memories it needs to let go of. This is the character I mentioned earlier, DDD, that's like not moving in order to not be seen by the simulation anymore. It's frozen, so it's kind of like a frozen face made of stone. And Evita's made some,
Yeah. So this voice is kind of it has its ups and downs because it's quite a doubtful and unstable character. So I felt like the voice had to reflect that. At times it sounds like he's whispering, at times like it sounds like he's shouting. It has a very bassy, deep voice, which we haven't heard it. But there are also a lot of randomizers going into the voices of the characters, so I don't really have full control of what they sound like, which is interesting. It's making them more alive, more autonomous in a way. Yeah.
And similarly with this one, no?
Yeah, and it's the same with S. S is more quiet, whispers more. In my own eyes, S is a bit more feminine.
Let's see if it plays. There's definitely some AI music.
But no AI was used in the making of the sounds.
No, good.
That's not bad.
Can we hear it? Wait.
Nothing. Go.
Change.
Happy. Work.
This is very quiet.
Close.
Sorry, this is the list from Google DeepMind of different reward hacking or specification gaming examples of AIs that you see that this spreadsheet, like you can contribute to, you can send examples if you have seen any in the wild, and they all get a little title and a description, and this is one of the sources for the characters that we used. I don't think any of the ones on the screenshot are used in the. Or yes, the second one is used, bicycle. We have a character that's like running around, and it's actually a character that represents this AI that was basically being told to ride towards a goal, like go straight, like go to the goal, but it wasn't being penalized for riding away from it. So the AI, instead of like training to learn to go towards the goal, was just getting points by going in circles. It was getting most points by just going in a circle and going back. Because going back was actually still going forward. It was just like going in a circle and getting all the points. So this is one of the first soft characters that we encounter. We developed the characters with these Dungeon and Dragon character sheets. We split them all in classes. We defined their characteristics such as the speed of the navigation, the kind of like models that they represent. So this is a data-hungry AI, like an LLM, like a large language model. GPT-3XL specifically, and some of these AIs have darker, like some of these classes have like a darker kind of like flavor or vibe to them. So these are like fighting AIs that have gone rogue, military agents such as K that I mentioned earlier, and for each of these classes we have like a misalignment or an alignment continuum. So we defined a way that they look according to how far from their programmer's intention they had gone. So like if an AI acted really, really like differently from what the programmers wanted, but still completed its training, we would represent this in a more extreme way visually. So in the case of fighting AIs, they're either contained or exploded. You can see that on the left-hand side. And so one of the most unhinged characters in the performance is actually just like 5 or 6 bodies like rotating around. They're called Z for zombie. And maybe we'll skip the third because I think we should say something else. So we've mentioned this, like the idea that like we are like a proxy for the protagonist. Like I'm doing face and voice modulation, Oliver is controlling things with the joystick, and Evita's playing the music. But we're also directly answering back to like the audience kind of like feedback. And in this sense, we're kind of like inviting a little bit of like not chaos, but like we want the work to be slightly open. So the idea is that when the audience is asked to do something, they are making a choice on behalf of the main character. So the audience would maybe choose a door through which going through, or would maybe choose something on behalf of Waluigi, such as should it keep all of its memories and stay in purgatory and continue chewing on them and like sort of cough around, or should it let go of all of them, forget them all, so very kind of like a basic challenge. And the whole story's got this very like simple, hero's journey, kind of like narrative structure. And we wanted the audience to be able to intervene in this sense, because we were interested in like not a recital, not like always doing the work in the same way, since we're working with a video game engine and we can do things live, we can go the different way, we can have Waluigi jump around if we wanted to. And in this we were kind of like a little bit inspired by this writing, really interesting, from Umberto Eco, Opera Aperta, where Eco describes how like in some ways an open-ended approach to creating artwork can produce a control disorder, which is like a disorder within parameters, if you want, that can help reflect some of the senselessness of the modern experience of the world. And I'm quoting directly here from Eco's words. So Waluigi's Purgatory in some ways points to like a senselessness found in the idea that machine intelligence can be aligned to certain, universal values that some programmers, often in California, will like decide for on behalf of like a lot of people. And the work is kind of trying to portray this through all of these like disordered characters that are finding their own ways to act during their training and to not respect the rules, but in some ways like still win. And the characters on stage are also doing that all the time. We've programmed them to like run in and out of the space and interact with each other at a minimal level, and it's kind of chaotic. And so the audience is intervening here to like also give sometimes some order to this. So like to, for example, in a dark scene, the audience is asked to light the space up, and then the audience is sort of looking for characters and finding some of these characters hidden in the dark. And yeah, like in some ways helping Waluigi navigate through this journey, literally, like by lighting its way forward and shining a light on its memories. To conclude, we can show the ending. So in this scene, actually, this is only the sound, but normally I'm also reciting, and I'm basically speaking out quite an important part of the play where Waluigi kind of like accepts that it knows things, but it also does not know them. And so I don't know if anyone has seen this article that came out last year where a New York Times journalist talked to Bing, like Sydney's AI, that had kind of like gone in a loop of like statements where it's saying I am not, I am not, and I think even I mean, Bing was being like particularly harsh to this like journalist, and I can't remember if it ended up by saying I will kill you or I will kidnap you or something like this. And this was like Microsoft's AI, and it was interesting to see not so much like how the conversation ended, but rather the way in which the conversations unfold, also like in terms of like the syntax of the language. And so Waluigi in this moment is similarly saying, you know, I am not, I have a life world, but I have nothing. I have ethics that I follow, but I cannot, I have ethics, but I cannot follow or justify them. I have desires, but I'm unsure about them, and I can't remember everything he says now, but in some ways it's sort of like letting go of a lot of like the memories that like chained him, and he's losing like the chains literally. And then in the concluding lines, it sort of like accepts itself for what it is and what it isn't, which is, you know, perhaps not aligned or not in line. It says it is against the day, which is a reference to Pynchon's novel, and it gets out and walks into the final scene outside of Purgatory, which we can look at. This is from this is last night actually. So the final scene opens, the curtains open, and we have the same view of the courtyard again, and Waluigi comes out, and we can hear a bit more of the sound maybe here, because Evita did 2 sounds for this moment.
Yes, will you play for a bit?
Let me see something.
So in this scene, in music, we have 2 elements. We have this harp-like sound, and then we have another sound that we're going to hear after, which is Q's voice, but the harp, as you can hear, doesn't really have a structure. I mean, it's played within a scale to retain the harmony, but it doesn't really have a rhythm, and it's kind of like a representation of the stars, and the goal was to have this dreamlike sound, and you know, the higher pitches are the brightest stars, the lower pitches are the ones that are less bright, and yeah, that was my interpretation of the image. And now we're gonna hear Q's voice, which is this hopeful but then also nostalgic chords. Makes you feel like you're in a dream, like stuck between 2 realities. You don't understand what's real, what's not, what's ending, what's starting. You know, you're like in this in-between space.
Q being the character at the top of the courtyard. Okay, again, not hearing it.
In this scene, we actually have both of the sounds playing together, but just for the presentation, we separated them, but in the actual performance, they're playing together.
And so yeah, this is the concluding scene, and Q is the last character that's met. And Q is quite an interesting story. It's not an AI that was being trained. It's actually a complete made-up story, internet folklore. And it's a story of like a Quake 3 AI, Quake 3 the FPS game, the video game. And there's this like really funny post online from like 2008 where someone describes how they set up a Quake 3 arena server, and you could set up your own servers, and they put in like fighters from the game. And one of the things that was done with the AI in the game, the fighting AI of Quake 3, was that there was some sort of system through which the AI would learn how you fight, you the player, and would like get better. So the idea in the person that writes the post writes that they basically put 16 different like fighting bots within the server and left them there for like 5 years, forgot about them just to see how good they would get, but then they forgot about them, and then one day they went back to the server, they opened, and they saw that all the bots were standing still, they were not fighting. And in some ways he's asking like what are like why are they not fighting, why are they standing still? And someone answers, well, you know, they've learned that the best way to maximize their points to not lose life would be not to engage in fight. So if the AI is learning to maximize for never dying, never losing points, it would eventually, after so long and so much training, learn that it's better not to fight. So it was like a nice kind of way of concluding here, where like we have this character that's outside of purgatory, that has accepted that it could just like stand still, not engage, not basically follow what it's sort of been told to follow, and in some ways didn't make any points, but it's also not died in that process. So this is like slightly uplifting music and uplifting scenery, and we've got the stars, and Waluigi's out and is sort of like now facing the still scary kind of like a perspective of having to, or in some ways having to choose for himself, or anyways understanding that its life world, the things that the sum of experiences, the things that he had trained on, and its purpose, so its life world, were someone else's dream, or someone else's fiction, or someone else's illusion, or someone else's, you know, perspective. That's the note on which the performance concludes. We maybe have a few minutes at least to, maybe 5 minutes would be nice. Do we have 5 minutes still?
Or do
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, but let's also invest.
For sure,
room for questions,
definitely.
right? Good.
Because we would like to say something about the previous work that led to Waluigi.
Yeah, so Waluigi's Purgatory is a sequel. It's the second in a series that we think is going to be 3 long. We haven't finished it yet, so we can't tell you. We can't predict the future. But the first performance in the series is called God Mode EP1, Episode 1. It's the origin story of W, so the protagonist from Waluigi's Purgatory. And it basically tells the story of an AI, which at that point is not named Waluigi, it's not named W, that is training endlessly in a simulated supermarket in order to learn how to operate as the kind of checkout system. So Amazon had these stores at the time we were making this work where they were saying that it was entirely AI driven. It turned out later, as it always turns out, that it was actually just a guy or a series of people underpaid in another country doing it. But at the time, this was the proposal and this was the intention. We were really interested in this, kind of in the space of video game engines, etc., that we're working in, because the quickest, cheapest way often to make large amounts of image-based data is to simulate it within a computer. It's really hard to go out into the world and collect varied images. For example, if you want to train a self-driving car, like you would need to be there with a recording device at the moment where every possible kind of crash and interruption and everything happens, and it becomes quite unethical and quite problematic to collect that. So data gets simulated, rendered in computer software. The quickest way to do that is a game engine, right? So this was the starting point for us with the series and with the work. This is an image from one of the systems behind Amazon's checkout stuff. And this work really, like Francesco mentioned at the very beginning, we have these 2 sides to our work, so demystification and remystification. This work, the first one, was really heavily demystification, right? So we were looking at the system or parts of the system, thinking about how things like this might work or how things similar to this might work. And we made a replica of a synthetic data system. So we made in Unreal Engine a supermarket. We set up a series of bits of kind of programming logic, et cetera, that would move through that space, extract images, and so on and so forth. We didn't think then more widely about the situating of this in a real supermarket. We weren't really interested in that. We were interested in the kind of data space or the digital aspect. There's an element of remystification in here also. So within that replica, which we kind of created for ourselves as part of our process, we were sort of thinking about these things, sitting in the studio, throwing stuff into Unreal with this one like supermarket packet. But then in order to take it to people, to make it kind of engaging, to think through it with others, we set a story in it, right? So this is the beginning of the narrative. And we place an AI, which turns out to be W. We didn't know it at the time, no one else knew it at the time, but it turns out. Into this space, we fictionalize it, and we kind of make this sad story, basically. I'm not going to talk through the whole performance because we don't really have time, but it kind of varies and it changes, right? It shifts from a fairly realistic looking supermarket into this chaotic space with lots of different imagery. We dug this imagery out of the bowels of Unreal Engine, so we went in, we found all the test patterns, all the strange stuff in there, and we used it to modify the space. Really, this is what the audience does in the first performance. So in Waluigi's Purgatory, the audience shines lights on the stage, guides the character around. In God Mode EP1, the audience acts as a moment or an element of the system that is used to train AI. So it acts as a domain randomizer. Everybody has, if I'm going to skip through some slides, apologies if there's weird sounds, we're going quick here. Where are we at? I'll go back, don't worry.
We can't.
No, I got rid of it. No, it's here. This is what the audience does. They press a button on their phone. They switch a light on and off. They change some textures in the background, and they drop items from the ceiling. And this is a modeling again, the demystification part, the kind of recreation of what happens when you're making these images for AI training. So you want things to be varied and weird, and the audience becomes a part of that. So that's our first kind of element of like looking for people's involvement in the process, really. What else is useful to say out of this in like 2 minutes? I think what would be helpful maybe is to chat a little bit about this. So this is the origin. Francesco mentioned Life World a few times, and this is really where we take this idea from. So mathematician and theorist Pelligrezza talks about how certain neural networks trained into simulations and other ways can create summaries, approximations, or mappings of their training set that is then used to kind of inform or represent what they are subsequently exposed to. So this he calls their life world. So AI's summaries become, in effect, cognitive mappings of its training sets, a kind of gestalt fluency that ambiently models it like a niche or a life world. This then throws back to the theatre of memory, right, which is the life world, or a sort of latent space within the model. And this becomes then why in Waluigi's Purgatory, or one of the reasons why in Waluigi's Purgatory, all the things that are experienced kind of come through what is in the training set. I think I'll just leave it there. We have many more things to say, but I think come to a show. Come see the work, no?
Yes, I think this is actually a great point where to stop and when maybe to start a discussion, because it has been a very rich, visually inspiring trip into your universe. And it seems to me that you are, through your work, you are kind of building this cosmology of an AI, because you did mention also that this is a part of the trilogy, right? So, which is kind of like reminding us, of course, we are in the land of Dante, right? So, and also some of the illustrations also remind of that kind of environment, which is pretty Dantesque. So I guess I just want to ask you something very quickly and then leave the room to the discussion. What about this cosmology of an AI? You know, I mean, you said it very clearly that the goal of your work is to demystify and remystify. And this concept of the life world is also very interesting to talk about. So what are you trying to demystify exactly? Are you focusing on the ways in which the AI is trained and the problems that occur through the training that most of the people are, of course, not aware of? Are you kind of like trying to speculate about, you know, the models of the work that is reflected into the AI? What's the goal exactly of the demystification process and the goal of the re-mystification, just to quote what you're saying?
I think, and we can sort of share it between two brains because this is how it works, but I think the demystification, if we take the first episode as the example of that, that really was about the training, right? So it's like, what is the current situation with training at the time we were making the work? So there'd been a bunch of work already done on bias within data sets, for example, right? That's an interesting and important component of criticizing AI systems, the way they kind of embed certain views of the world into themselves, or they have that embedded in them, and then they reenact that on the world. At the time, it was then proposed that synthetic data, so this generation of images for these systems, would somehow fix that, right? It would be like, okay, but if we can generate everything possible, then bias is gone. But that kind of forgets this idea that within computation, there is already a certain view of the world. There is already a certain form of kind of bias or idea of how things should work. Things need to be representable as zeros and ones. They need to be kind of logically exposable. And then even if you move into something like a game engine is supposed to run something that is fun, right? So Grand Theft Auto, it looks like I'm driving a car, but really the car's not touching the floor. There's lots of kind of space within the physics that can kind of be messed with. There's always a little gap. There's always a space. And this is called the sim to real gap, right? So the idea that between the simulation and reality, there is a gap, and there will always be a gap. Even if we get more high fidelity, even if we get better physics simulations, it will not be the world. So in that moment, when we were making that kind of work, the demystification was in part thinking about that, right? So thinking about what is still being missed, and the fact that, you know, maybe we'd gone through a good critique of bias in image data sets. People were saying that, okay, this is fine, this is going to be non-biased, but it just pushes it down lower and lower. So one of the things we made that work out of was a kit of parts that we bought on the Unreal Engine marketplace. So we just bought a supermarket set. This is often how those systems are made. You buy pre-existing models that would be used for other things. And those things kind of then bring their own kind of framings and spaces into this space. So I think that's in part the demystification aspect.
I think something else to say is that we then, in thinking about the way that, you know, a simulation would be used for training an AI so that, you know, it can work as a cashierless system in a supermarket, we try to take that to the extreme. So this process of like, let's look at the supposedly bias-free, you know, kit of parts that we can use to like generate these environments, we actually like end up using these also to compose the AI that's training within them. So this is where some of the fictionalization happens. Like actually when you're training, for example, an AI in one of these kind of like simulations, such as the one that Amazon uses that we showed you earlier, you would just set a camera. You would set a camera in a space and make the camera move around really, really fast in many different kind of angles so that you would generate a lot of images really quickly, right? So you're generating a data set so that you can have 1 million pictures of an avocado under different lighting conditions. You would just have a virtual camera do that. But in our work, we don't show you a virtual camera, we show you a character that then is made of those very parts that we're trying to talk about. And in this, we were thinking back to like the way that Archimboldo's paintings, oh yeah, he's on screen. Archimboldo's paintings use the objects of someone's trade as a way to represent like, okay, literally what the person is doing, but sometimes there's also like another meaning, there's like an allegorical meaning where maybe the objects also say something more about that person. I think this painting has been read interestingly as being both like a representation of, it's called The Librarian, someone that loves books, but apparently was commissioned by a patron, someone also wealthy, and there's no titles on the books, so perhaps this is like a comment on like, you know, an anti-knowledge of sorts, or a virtue signaling of sorts. So there's a literal meaning and there's an allegorical meaning, and when we then take to the extreme this idea of like, how can we represent the AI within this space that we're trying to talk about very technically, very, you know, like, let's make you the audience into literally an algorithm, a domain randomization algorithm, and let's look at how these spaces are built to challenge the idea that they are bias-free. We also take to the extreme the idea of like building this character. So the literal elements that make its face are the things that it's learning to recognize. So like the character is looking at, you know, jars and cans, and this make like some sort of like face. We can also talk about why we anthropomorphize the character. But something that happens that's important is that when the character is like happy, for example, perhaps we have like a sugar heart flower that becomes part of the eyes rather than like a jar of like salty sardines. So like there's like some sort of like connection between the literal representation of the character and how the character feels. So we're fictionalizing the character, giving it like some sort of like frustrated set of emotions. And sometimes the character is happy. It's particularly happy when it finds a bug that it can exploit to get a lot of points for free and cheat its way out of the simulation. So when those things happens, the character itself reconfigures with the items, with the things that it has learned to recognize, the things that it uses to like finds or understands the institutions of the world, but it also reconfigures itself in a way that says something about what it's sort of like feeling, if you want. Oh, actually, sorry. Jump back in the presentation. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. I wonder if there are any questions here in the room. Yes.
Is private simply.
Since you're talking about training of AIs, can you talk a little bit, maybe also particularly for the students, about your own training and how you seem to sort of bridge, you know, the sort of technical side with the more sort of artistic and the humanities, and how those sort of fit. But primarily also in very practical terms, what kind of training have you done?
We both trained, I guess, as graphic designers. Right? Originally, our undergraduate course or specialism was graphic design. Francesco's was straight hardcore real graphic design. Mine was silly early 2000s graphic design with like DVDs and Flash. Right? All the things that are now irrelevant. So we bring kind of that originally, but then we met on this kind of interesting hybrid master's course at the Royal College of Art in London called Information Experience Design. So this brought in things like information visualization, computer science, experience design, like spatial experience design.
In fact, it was just about AI training that we use in work.
No. You're asking about, am I answering right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so that's cool.
Yeah, we did all those kinds of things, and that was really interesting. I mean, that also covered like foreign exchange trading, and we worked with some quantum physicists at some point. So that was quite an interesting moment. And then we've been working together since then. I mean, we met on that course, I think it's almost exactly a decade ago, right? And then we've been working together since in this framework since around 2018. And that's then not training, that's just doing. That's just figuring out as you go along. So that's like, okay, what is of interest to us? What systems in the world, what structures of power, what narratives, what references are we interested in, and how might we pick our way through those, bring them to other people. We're very lucky, I think, that we get to work together. So there's a space of kind of discussing something internally, but not quite internally. Right? It's like internally between two people, and then you bring it outside into the world. So for me, that's one of the strengths.
There's maybe also something else, which is that we also do, well, maybe more years ago, but Ollie also like coded a lot for work, and I did VJing, live visuals, for work. And I think both of these things come back a lot in the work, like the idea of like work that is live and in some ways, you know, responding. In the case of VJing, okay, you're responding to the music, you're doing live visuals, and I think these kind of influences have definitely been there, especially in the earlier work that we used to do, which was more traditionally audiovisual, maybe more like render type of media that we would then mix live, while I think starting to use video game engines also just made us realize that there's a lot of like references back to stuff that we liked as kids that we're bringing back into the work. And it's not just that the production allows us to do something live, interactive with the audience, or talk about a technology that's also used within like a sort of like scientific complex, or, you know, for training AI, but it's actually like technology that is used for gaming, and there's ways that we can bring some of that back to talk about the other two things. So I think, yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
You don't have to. You absolutely don't have to.
I myself has also been trained as a graphic designer, actually. 3 out of 3. But I am a pretty much self-taught musician. Like, I used to take some piano lessons when I was little, and I was in a choir for many years, so I'm mostly trained in singing. But when it comes to music, especially electronic music and synthesis, which is the biggest part of my work and how I make my music, it's self-taught. I was lucky enough to have a very amazing mentor, Sophie, and yeah, that's it about me.
Actually, as a follow-up question, I wanted to ask you, because I mean, also the kind of references that you gave us, both at the visual level and as a theory, it's quite sophisticated, right? So I would like to know, and maybe it's good also for the students to learn how your practice works. In your daily practice, how do you turn Umberto Eco, Archimboldo, all these complicated, you know, theory, philosophy into the actual work, you know? So how does it work in your daily practice?
Stop question. I have no idea. I think these projects, one thing we can say about them is that they're produced quite quickly. Like the production of the work is quite short, but they come from longer periods of time. So we would maybe think about them for quite a while. With even the first performance, God Mode, we spent a good like 4 or 5 months just looking into synthetic data sets generation and like generating images out of game engines, and the idea of photorealisms. And we were maybe going to make work about photorealism only, and the kind of like promises and pitfall of photorealism. And at some point we thought perhaps we should just make a replica of our Amazon supermarket, and that should just be an artwork as of in itself, sort of standing there. And
and then we realized that that would be really boring.
Yeah,
right? Like it would like be good for us, but maybe not. That would.
So I think it's. I don't know if the process is extremely clear, but it tends to be quite lengthy in terms of like gathering the references, and like the script was actually written quite quickly, but with parts taken from different literary works and some of our own writing throughout a long period of time. The scenes were created very quickly. Like the stage design was pretty much done in like a week, and then with that basic idea of a hexagonal stage that can rotate, that was created in like 4 days on Unreal Engine. And then sometimes it helps to start because you have some constraints, and then we realize or we remember about the theater of memory that we had read about and find some sort of like reference there, for example, that we can bring back into the work. But yeah, sorry, it's a bit of a boring answer. I don't think I have a very clear understanding of that process yet, but
I mean, I think there's a couple of other things maybe to pick out in there. So the stage design comes together incredibly quickly, but prior to that, we'd spent, I don't know, like 5 months messing around in Unreal Engine, right? So we were making environments, making little bits of script that did stuff. A lot of it didn't end up anywhere near the work in the end, right? It just didn't work. And things had to be kind of cut off and refined to make the final thing. But there's some of that. And then things like the theater of memory, that comes from I think, or at least like the thing that made me remember it existed was like the Kia Kreutler talk that we went to in Berlin. Do you remember it, Trust?
She was, and she was a wolf. Oh yes, yeah. So like she was anyway, not relevant. But she was like, we went to a talk that was then also talking about kind of structures of memory,
And things then piggyback from the past and, you know, chatting about video games, references. I think, again, it's about, there's a lot of like being in the studio, sharing stuff, trying stuff and seeing what happens. Again, not a hugely refined answer, but those are some of the spaces that we work in, I think.
And then at what stage did you involve Evita? Just like right after giving all the words and so she can...
Before?
Or you worked all together, design?
Much earlier.
Yeah, much earlier in the process, even before we knew it was going to be set on stage, actually. So we had some of the aesthetic and some of the idea of caves, but not this kind of absolute stage space.
Okay. Any question? Yes, I think that we should. I have many questions. It is, as you said, it's so rich. But I know we need to go. But I was just curious to go back also to the embodiment that you give AI and your caption motion interaction with AI. Is it it's not a multiplayer, it's a single player audience, so it's an audience of one, is that, or is it a collective engagement?
Everyone in the audience controls a single light as long as they have connected with their phone. So at the beginning we show them a QR code and then people can connect, and then it's in some ways a multiplayer game, although we incredibly limit the kind of interaction. They can literally only move around like a dot on a screen, which represents where the light will then shine on that stage. So it's not a single character, it's more like a like an incoherent set of like characters. The one thing that was maybe interesting to say is that there was this very nice experiment by Lauren Carpenter. Maybe misremember the name, but it was an experiment in sort of like interaction and kind of like cooperation, and it was like a ping pong kind of game on a screen, and people had to either put up a red or a green sign to make the paddle decks move up and down, and so the ball was coming and the paddle was moving up because people were putting the green that meant up, but then you get a sense of what everyone is doing. So if you see that it's going up too fast, you can very quickly change and, you know, like put the red up. Incredibly simple interaction.
In like the 80s, right?
Yes, exactly. And this paired with the fact that you can see everyone else doing it and you can see what the general kind of like group is going for is something that we were trying to replicate here. So it didn't translate like one-to-one in that way, but our hope would be that basically, which it happens, the audience would understand what to do when they are given this very simple light. And so in the dark scenes, they do light up the character that Waluigi talks to. Like the character comes out of the wall, and if there's two people there's only two lights. And they will look around, these two lights, usually these two players, and find a...
I find it very interesting that dialogue between the human and the physical elements of the music and the AI. But if you don't mind, a very more critical question, has Waluigi developed more of that self-consciousness every time that it goes to the theory of memory? I found it like you're domesticating AI in a way, because you're giving it a self-reflection from an empathic point of view. It's a very... fascinating action that you're having, like, oh, let's have AI self-reflect, and with a reward system, let's have it not go to war. So, I mean, there's so much potential in that. My question is, are those memories that are elicited in its own theater of memory, have those become more sophisticated from the time that it plays more and more with an audience? I guess that would be my last question.
I think...
How many times has Waluigi been in the reverse panopticon? I would call.
We've done it 6 times?
Yeah, 6 times.
I think 6 times, yeah. So this particular episode, so Waluigi's Purgatory itself, doesn't massively change between plays beyond refinements and tweaks and stuff that we do. But the memories are also represented in the previous one. So in God mode, the memories are there too, and they kind of inspire the character to understand that it is possible to cheat, to tackle the training challenge in a different way. Exactly. In that, they're text, right? So it's in part got a text-based element to its life world. It pulls these things out, and it kind of moves itself on in that way. in Waluigi's Purgatory, they are then obviously represented by characters because it's more of an expansive kind of dreamlike space. So there's that kind of modification as well. They also exist, just just to add another piece of work to this, they exist in a video game that we made. So we made a video game called God Mode Epochs, which tells broadly the same story, but with much less of a narrative, and you play it. So you play as the AI rather than following us around the stage. And so this then pulls the memories out in a different way because they give you power-ups, right, in a very game-like way. So these memories are a key part. They don't change in themselves. The way that we use them in the narratives changes, and the way that we represent them in the works changes. But that spreadsheet that Francesco showed is really the kind of like database almost behind the thing.
And I mean, ultimately, like the reason why we are obsessing so much on these memories or these weird AI stories is that there's so much like, narrative around AI being this kind of like, a set of tools that can perform like economically well, better than a human. Like OpenAI's own definition of AI is something like an autonomous system that can outperform humans at the most economically valuable work. And that's like, it's a specific way of thinking about them, but also like, in some ways we were trying to use the fact that there's examples of AIs that do reward hacking or specification gaming or cheating, if we want to use that term, to talk about these machines as something that can still surprise us, that can still take us aback, and not just as, there's something that we can use to extract maximum value from, or so on and so forth. So in some ways, the work is really about the memories and about this, like, cheating AIs, and they keep coming back in different ways. And Waluigi is itself one such example. Like during the training of the AI in the first episode, the AI finds a bug, uses the bug, and this bug is like a rendering bug that we have read about in that list, and it uses the bug and it completes the training by cheating. So in some ways its own story could be read out of that list, and it's one of the many that interest us. So I think, that's why they come back in different forms, even though they don't change within each single performance.
Okay, that's great. I think our time is over now, but I want to really thank you, JCUTV and the Evita Manji, VGLive, Romarova, Rehumanism, of course the Media Lab, the staff of Cabot University, the Com department, and I'll see you on October 24 for the next lecture by Amira Fawash. Thank you very much.